Today, I'm excited to have Sylvia Bartell here to talk about an aspect that I touch on but don't fully understand. So I'm looking forward to learning quite a little bit. And I think as our energy system here in the state is evolving, these kind of things, it's going to be important for us to understand that as well. I'm also very happy to have Sylvia because she's a Nebraska native. She comes from Sutton, Nebraska. I'm going to let her tell you how she made her path to the Washington, D.C. office of Hush Blackwell, and then she's going to walk us through some of the issues that are FERC related, and particularly FERC related to the Southwest Power Pool. So with that very brief introduction and for her to add to, I'm going to introduce Sylvia. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Good morning to everyone. As David mentioned, my name is Sylvia. I was born and raised in a small town called Sutton over in Clay County, Nebraska. And so I'm really happy to be here. It's always wonderful to come home. And thank you for having me. Also, thank you to the Wind and Solar Conference and the intern Sam, who's been doing a lot of coordinating. So just about my background, I went to high school in Sutton, and then from there I went to Creighton University, about an hour east of here, in Omaha. And from there I went to a small little school in Vermont that focuses on environmental law and energy law. And similar to Sutton, it was a town of about 1,200 people, so not too many more people. And then from there, I got a job with Hush Blackwell, focusing on energy regulation, specifically law that is coming out of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is an independent agency in Washington, D.C. It's similar to the agency like the SEC in that it's independent. The commissioners are appointed by the president, but they can't be removed by the president. So I focus on that at Hush Blackwell, and I also do maybe a third of my work is renewable transactions for renewable assets, representing buyers and sellers, and then sometimes tax equity investors in those projects. So I really love what I do. I love learning from the clients that I work with and a lot of the attorneys who are in my practice group. So I'm really excited to speak to you all today. I know you each probably have a different involvement in this industry, whether you're a state policymaker, a state regulator, a muni or a town, a developer yourself, etc. So I welcome any questions. So just a little overview of what we'll be talking about today. First, I want to speak a little bit about the current composition at FERC. President Trump has appointed three of the commissioners who are currently sitting there. I'll get a little bit more into that. The politics do come into play. Then I want to touch on a couple of pending legislation before Congress, interconnection revisions at SPP, and Order 841, which is a FERC regulation that relates to storage resources. And then finally, a proposed rule that would impact the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. And most commonly, people know about PURPA through qualifying facilities. So just to speak about the current FERC composition, as I mentioned, right now there are 3 sitting commissioners. All of them were appointed by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate. Historically, this has been an independent agency and also historically nonpartisan. Even though the commissioners are appointed, there can be no more than 3 commissioners from the party of the president. The chairman of the commission is Chairman Chatterjee, who used to work for Mitch McConnell over in the Senate. Commissioner McNamee, who has a state commission background and also was in private practice. Those are the 2 Republicans currently sitting. And then Commissioner Glick is the 3rd commissioner, who's a Democrat from the Pacific Northwest area. There's one pending nomination, a professional named Dan Lee, who's a Republican. He used to be in private practice at a large law firm. He is he has worked at the commission currently, and he's been nominated, but his nomination is pending in the Senate. This nomination of just one Republican is a little bit of a departure from the historic nonpartisan practices at FERC. Typically, the president will pair its nominations to nominate both a Republican and a Democrat. So a little bit of a departure there from historic practices. And the two vacancies on the commission open the commission up to a little bit of vulnerability when it comes to quorum. In order to pass regulations, in order to issue decisions on any kind of a case at FERC or certain kinds of filings, there must be a majority of commissioners. So in the event that one of the commissioners would have to recuse themselves from a decision, let's say because maybe their client was involved in the case, they would ethically be required to recuse themselves. The commission wouldn't be able to act because there would only be two commissioners. So there's a little bit of potential for some delay at the commission. But right now they do have three, so it's not the default. So now just going over to Capitol Hill, some legislative developments over in the Senate and in the House. First, this is a very hot topic right now. It's the extension of the ITC, and that's currently pending. It's in, as of yesterday, I checked yesterday, so there could have been a development. But that's pending in the finance committees and then natural resources committees. And this is proposed to extend the ITC by 5 years. This is relevant, of course, because it provides more tax incentives to projects. A similar type of proposal is a proposal for storage tax credits. Again, this is also pending. Similarly, a offshore wind development act, not so pertinent here in the middle of the country, but certainly something for the industry to be aware of. And then finally, there's the senator from New Mexico has publicly stated that he will be introducing legislation to direct FERC to improve its regional planning and also to incentivize regionally significant transmission projects. This kind of legislation has not, a different iteration of this was a little bit unsuccessful in prior years, but this is a new iteration of that. So people are hopeful that it can incentivize transmission development to provide access to the grid for renewables. And in advocating for this legislation, Senator Heinrich stated that full utilization of our renewable potential will only be possible when we have the transmission capacity in place to deliver that power to market. So now I'd like to talk about interconnection revisions at SPP. This is applicable to projects in Nebraska because projects that are looking to sell their power, their capacity into SPP markets, they have to adhere to SPP's tariff. And so far at the conference, we've heard a lot about the tariff. So just taking a couple of minutes to talk about that. The tariff is a tremendously large document that is multifaceted. It deals with transmission rates, transmission construction, generation, and really anything that comes to the rules of how SPP operates and manages the grid that's under SPP's functional control. A quick way to access the tariff is through SPP's website. It's very user-friendly and it's quick to download provisions of the tariff that you might be dealing with in your work or projects that you're involved in. Another way to access the tariff that I find to be helpful is on the FERC website, ferc.gov. They have a portal that's called e-tariff, and you can look up individual sections of the tariff. So let's say you're working on a project that you're developing, or maybe you're working with a developer, and you're hearing about a certain section of the tariff. Maybe you have a reference number. You can look up that specific reference number and get some more context on what's going on. So that's just kind of a way to do a little bit of research into what people have argued about how this tariff provision should be implemented or how it might apply in your situation. So very recently, FERC accepted revisions to the SPP interconnection process. That process is a part of SPP's tariff. Similar to the interconnection procedures, SPP's tariff contains the generator interconnection agreement. That's an agreement that a developer, a project owner, the transmission owner, and SPP all sign together that identifies rights and responsibilities of those parties. That's a very standard template document, so there's not really room for a lot of negotiation there. If you do change a provision, it has to be filed with FERC. The one thing that's project-specific are usually the appendices, where you have details about the specific facility that's subject to the generator interconnection agreement. So FERC has recently approved revisions to that, and they're effective as of this summer 2019. And SPP has proposed, and it's been accepted, to use a 3-phase process. They had previously had a feasibility queue and a preliminary queue, but those were not mandatory. So SPP has now done away with those, and they're using a structure that's similar to MISO, where you enter the first stage of the queue and you progress sequentially through the queue. And at each stage, there's a milestone type of payment. So that's been accepted, and SPP estimates that kind of under a best case scenario with this new queue, that the total time from entering into phase 1 to execution or signing of that generator interconnection agreement is roughly 485 days. One of the things that has changed in this generator interconnection process is the financial security. And SPP has proposed that the interconnection customer will pay roughly 20% of its estimated network upgrade cost responsibility. And that bucket of costs will be divided throughout each phase as you're going through that 3-phase process. And SPP's rationale for doing this, that was accepted by FERC, is to tie the amount of security to the actual network upgrade costs. So the customer has a sense of what they'll be responsible, and it kind of relates to the cost causation there. You're causing this amount of network upgrades to be required, so that's going to be your financial security, a percentage of that. And then there was a separate issue that generation developers raised that FERC rejected. They had said that they had later on in the interconnection queue, all of a sudden they were facing an additional bucket of costs called affected system costs. And they had said, we need more advance notice of these costs. They come late in the queue. They can sometimes be very significant. And an affected system cost it's similar to a network upgrade cost in that it's a cost to upgrade the transmission system to accommodate a generator. But they take place on a neighboring system, a neighboring transmission system that's affected by the generator's interconnection. And so FERC said that it rejected those arguments because SPP had argued that it's really out of its control. It gets affected system costs later in the stage, and it's not up to SPP. And FERC accepted that argument. So that's most of what I'd like to talk about with interconnection process and agreement. So now I'd like to move on to a very recent development at FERC, which is this order number 841. very catchy title, and SPP's compliance filing. Yesterday, we heard from an SPP professional who, when discussing battery storage, he said SPP is in compliance. This is, my guess is this is what he was referring to. FERC's order directing RTOs to revise their tariffs in order to provide a participation model for storage resources. And it's very important here to recognize that FERC defines storage very broadly. It's not limited to batteries. It could also include pumped hydroelectric, flywheels, compressed air, and even other technologies that maybe don't exist today, but if they meet this broad definition of storage, they can use this participation model to participate in SPP markets. And so this kind of just speaks about how storage resources have the ability to participate in SPP in about 5 different ways. Again, the professional from SPP discussed these 5 different ways. But I think that's from a practical level, each of those 5 ways of participating are revenue streams for a project. So by passing this rule, it makes these types of storage technologies more financeable, more profitable, so that they can actually move from a conceptual place into actual construction. Another thing that I think is pretty great about this rule is that SPP on compliance has confirmed that the market participant will be responsible for managing the state of charge of their resource. And this is a good thing from an owner's perspective, because it allows the owner to determine when they want to participate in SPP markets with that battery. They also have the option of participating in the retail side, so they can also determine when they do that. And a practical point here, often a project owner will delegate responsibility to a third party to manage their facility. This happens all across the board. It could happen with a coal plant, a gas plant, renewable plants, and storage facilities. And those agreements are usually called an energy management agreement or an energy services agreement. In that agreement, this could be a place to address managing the state of charge, similar to the way you might address how that third party is responsible for bidding your resource into SPP. So you could be thinking about that maybe in an attachment to that agreement. And also the FERC required the minimum size of storage resources not to exceed this 100 kilowatts. So relatively small storage resources are able to participate. One thing that FERC did not address was aggregation of storage resources, and SPP had filed a proposal to allow resources that were under 0.1 megawatts to aggregate. FERC rejected that, not on the merits, but on the grounds that it was just outside of the scope of this proceeding. And then while FERC did accept SPP's filing, and like the professional from SPP said, they are in compliance, FERC also directed SPP to submit some more compliance. Specifically, SPP was directed to submit a description of how it will meter these facilities and also the accounting mechanisms that it will use. It also directed SPP to clarify that these facilities can participate in wholesale and in retail markets. And this is particularly notable because several state commissions, as well as other participants, have appealed this order 841, to the DC Circuit. So while right now this is the law of the land, it is subject to this appeal. So that's something to keep your eye on. So finally, I would like to just discuss a little bit a proposal that FERC has issued. It's not current law. It's open to public comment right now. And this is the proposal to revise the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. Again, the politics kind of maybe come into play here. This proposed rule issued right after the Democratic commissioner had to step down from the commission because her term had expired. And so people in the industry are speculating that this wasn't able to be issued until the Republicans had a majority on the commission. And the one lone Democrat, Commissioner Glick, issued a very sharp dissent from this rule. It passed, this proposed rule. It passed with the vote of 2 of the commissioners, and the dissenting commissioner said that this proposed rule would effectively gut PURPA. And he said that this rule, PURPA, is required now more than ever because we absolutely need to be focusing on renewables development, and we need to be strengthening PURPA instead of repealing it. Repealing the rules of that is. PURPA was passed by Congress. But the commissioners in proposing this rule had said that we don't need it anymore. There's a robust wholesale markets. There's plenty of renewable generation, and also there's affordable natural gas prices. So they were arguing that the circumstances have changed significantly since PURPA was passed in 1978. What the proposal does, it proposes to give states more authority over the rates that qualifying facilities receive. It also will likely reduce the mandatory purchase obligation that utilities are required to purchase from qualifying facilities under certain situations. And it does that by modifying some of the rebuttable presumptions that PURPA establishes. The PURPA rules establish. And then it also expands the 1 mile rule to 20 miles. So the 1 mile rule is a way of determining if multiple facilities should be classified as one facility. Usually, if those facilities are within 1 mile of each other, they're for PURPA purposes, they're considered to be one facility. This expands that to 20 miles. So any facility within 20 miles of the other from the same developer will be seen as one project under the proposal. Certainly, that's also a pretty fact-specific determination, so I am just generalizing. And then also it requires a QF hopeful to demonstrate commercial viability and also a financial commitment to construct. So if this rule was adopted, the biggest impact would be felt in elimination of a fixed price contract under by giving states more authority to set rates, and also in the elimination or the expansion of the rebuttable presumption that I just discussed. So we're seeing a lot of discussion of this proposal. Like I said, the comment period is open right now. I've been hearing that most smaller solar facilities did rely on PURPA, especially in areas where there's not an RTO, so areas of the western United States and southern United States. What happens with this rule is to be seen, so that's something that we're definitely watching. And that's the gist of my presentation. I'm happy to receive questions. You know, I would imagine it was. I would want to check the rule. I haven't read it recently, the proposal. But each of the proposed revisions has a long section in the proposal where it discusses that. So I would imagine that it is.
So to repeat the question, I think what Tim's asking is, in the 1 mile rule, is there a rebuttable presumption from 1 to 20? Is that what you?
The 1 stays the same, but my understanding was the 1 to 20. Now there's a rebuttable presumption that an interconnecting utility can challenge that and say that it is part of what facility.
I believe that it's up to the generator to overcome the presumption of access, but whether it flips from at the 0 to 1 and 1 to 20, that might operate a little differently, but I think that it is up to the generator to overcome the presumption of access.
The presumption isn't to 20. It doesn't expand it from 1 to 20 as a per se presumption. That's just to the 1 mile, right? It's rebuttable from 1 to.
I would want to double check on that, but it's definitely a shifting of the burden.
Charles? Yeah, I have a question about Rule 841. As I understand it, as the rule came out, it will treat freestanding storage as kind of a new generator on one end, so that if you're in a congested area and want to add freestanding storage, just assume that that's going to add to the generation load. It doesn't allow you to add storage in a congested area to manage that congestion. Take the power off when the lines are congested and put it back on when they're not. And I wondered if you see long-term revisiting that, to look for ways that we can use storage more strategically to help manage transmission, make more effective use of relieve congestion, but still make fuller use of transmission at times when it's now not full.
Yeah, in 2017, FERC issued a policy statement on how you price storage resources. And in that policy statement, they discussed that the storage resources are eligible to receive transmission rates depending on how the facility operates. So I think that there is a lot of potential there, especially when we look at using storage facilities as transmission resources. I know that the 2017 issuance was a policy statement, so that has a different effect than a final rule. But I do have that up here that I can give you this citation to it afterwards. Absolutely.
Ed was saying is that DOE is apparently working on a report or a study about the seam interconnection and back and forth between the different RTOs, is what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And what was the...
Well, do you think that'll have any bearing or future implications on FERC rulings as I see what is being proposed?
I would imagine that it would certainly, in some shape or form, become a part of the FERC will hold technical conferences. So I would imagine, at minimum, they might, depending on the technical conference or the policy discussion, DOE might have a representative to discuss it and to more fully brief the commission. So yeah, absolutely. To the extent that there's a change in seams, that could also affect border rates. So certainly. But I'd like to learn more about it, and I recall you asked a similar question yesterday. So as you've been showing, it could come up in a lot of different contexts. Yeah, so just if this PURPA proposal is passed into a final rule, how might that be implemented by states, or how might states exercise this expanded authority? I think it really depends on the state. Some cynics might say that states where the incumbent utility has a little bit more of a presence in the state, a little bit more of an influence, that the PURPA rates might be less favorable to developers. But states would be most likely they would have a rulemaking procedure or some kind of a process where people could participate. But I do think it really depends on the state and what the state's goals are as far as their energy policy goes. But also I think that it will be really interesting to see comments that come in from generators and from developers. I've heard it both ways. I've heard the a solar trade group say that we absolutely need to be strengthening PURPA. A lot of solar facilities rely on this. But then I've heard large-scale, well-financed developers say we really only run PURPA as a sensitivity to see what a backstop price we could get for our project. So I'm really curious to see how generators respond to it, because in the opinion versus the dissent, they were pretty diametrically opposed. So I'm excited to see what develops in the docket. So the question was, will the requirement to exercise this new authority fall to the states? It's a discretionary, so it gives states the ability to modify some of their rules with respect to QF rates. So states could just leave what they have in place, but now they have a little bit more authority. If this passes, this is still pending. Yeah, so one of the appellants is NARUC, which is a great organization. They offer a lot of resources to state commissions, and but their clients are the states. And of course, their argument is that FERC is impeding on state jurisdiction because they are not limiting storage resources to the wholesale market. So it's really a jurisdictional argument, and they're saying that FERC has overstepped its jurisdictional limitations. And it's a very big appeal. It's not only NARUC, it's several other interested companies.
Yeah, well, if a majority of FERC is needed to pass any motion, how do they get the FERPA NOPR through when there's a 2-to-1 decision? Don't they need 3 to take any action?
They need 3 to act, and then in passing a rule or an issuance, then they just need a majority of the 3.
So it's basically 3 for a quorum.
Right, and then whatever the majority of the quorum is. So they had the 3 with Chatterjee, McNamee, and Glick. That was their quorum. And then Glick peeled off into the dissent, so they had the majority of the quorum.
But 2 of them wouldn't be able to pass another motion like on an order?
In order for it to be implemented? I believe they still would be able to, but there might be a nuance there with certain larger decisions. So there's some discussion about Commissioner Chatterjee has said that he wants more unanimous decisions from a larger full commission, just for rules to have more weight, more credibility. Currently, they only have the one pending nomination, the Republican Danley. There's been talk of another Democrat, but I don't. I checked last week, and she hadn't yet been nominated. So hopefully, the goal is to, of course, have a full commission. But I'm not sure under this administration if that is equally the goal to have 2 Democrats. But we'll see what happens. Thank you for your time.